That has stumped investigators for decades.
The brutal murders of 3 Rochester girls in the early 1970s have never been solved. News 10 NBC's Nikki Rudd has new details never heard before. Tonight, she's taking us inside the evidence, a story you'll only see on News 10 NBC.
Each victim was around the same age, 10 or 11 years old. They were all abducted from Rochester, sexually assaulted and strangled. Their bodies dumped in or near a town that started with the same initial as their first and last names. Carmen Colon found near Churchville, Wanda Walkowitz in Webster, and Michelle Maenza in Macedon.
This is one of the biggest cases in Monroe County history.
Carmen Colon was just 10 years old.
It's horrible and it's disturbing.
It was November 1971.
She was found partially clothed.
She had been sexually assaulted and strangled.
Manually strangled from the front, meaning with the hands.
Anytime that there's any sort of feeling in a city, in an area, that there may be a serial killer, people panic.
Monroe County Sheriff's investigator Trevor Hibbard and Sergeant C.J. Zimmerman believe this was just the start for a serial killer.
Carmen Colon was the first one. And whoever would have thought that something so dastardly was going on?
In the next 2 years, 2 more Rochester girls, also with double initials and in similar circumstances, were murdered.
I don't think in a million years that's a coincidence.
Somebody planned this.
I think so, yeah.
Carmen Colon lived with her grandparents on Brown Street. Around 4:30 in the afternoon on November 16th, she left the house to run an errand for her grandfather. She walked just about 2 blocks to what was then Jack's drugstore on West Main Street to pick up a prescription, but it wasn't ready.
And then she made the statement, I gotta go, I gotta go.
She left in a hurry and never came back. An hour later, a girl matching her description was seen running half naked along 490 just east of Churchville.
She was half clothed. She didn't have pants on. She just had a shirt on. And her arm, she was flailing her arm.
Dozens of drivers saw her. They also saw a car backing up toward her on the shoulder of the road, but no one stopped.
No one stopped.
It hurts to know how hard she tried, but unfortunately, it wasn't enough that day.
2 days later, Carmen was found on the side of Stearns Road.
2 boys bicycling made the discovery just east of Churchville. Monroe County Sheriff's investigator showed us pictures from the scene never released to the public.
She was wearing a top, a shirt, and sneakers and socks. She had no pants on, no underwear.
And for the first time, investigators told News 10 NBC Colon's pants and underwear were found just west from where the half-naked girl was seen running on 490. Although evidence was collected, it hasn't been enough to come up with a DNA profile.
My heart hurts for Carmen and her family.
The Colon family was devastated. Here they are at a press conference the day after Carmen's body was found.
The Puerto Rican community, through the Ibero-American Action League Incorporated, in behalf of the family of Carmen Colon.
The community rallied together, offering a reward for information leading to an arrest. 48 years later, the killer has never been caught.
So there's a good chance that the person's name is in these files somewhere.
All we need is just the tiniest of spark. That one puzzle piece. This case is soaked in gasoline. It just needs one little spark.
If you have information on the Carmen Colon case, call the Monroe County Sheriff's Office tip line at 585-753-4175. Coming up next week, the case of Wanda Walkowitz. And in this case, there is a DNA profile. How that could finally crack the case of the double initial murders. Plus, we'll show you evidence never seen before. Nikki Rudd, News 10 NBC.
This month, News 10 NBC is taking you inside the evidence of the double initial murders.
3 young Rochester girls were abducted, raped, and strangled in the early 1970s. Their bodies were dumped in or near a town that started with the same initial as their first and last names. Last week, we shared new details in the case of Carmen Colon. Tonight, News 10 NBC's Nikki Rudd has evidence never seen before in the case of Wanda Walkowitz.
The little redhead of Avenue D. That's how people remember Wanda Walkowitz. She was 11 years old when she disappeared just blocks from her home and was found dead the next day in Webster.
The body of young Wanda Walkowitz was discovered shortly after 10 o'clock this morning.
It was April 3rd, 1973.
The body was found at the Bay Bridge rest area on Route 104 near the Irondequoit Bay Bridge.
Her lifeless body spotted by a state trooper.
That he and other members of his department were checking area roadsides because of this case's similarity to the Karen Cologne case a year and a half ago.
Right down here.
New York State Police investigator George Jerbick took us back to the scene of the crime.
Her body was fully clothed and lying face down in the grass.
The day before, around 5:30 p.m., Wanda Walkowitz had gone to the Hillside Delicatessen to pick up some groceries for her mother. It was just 3 blocks from her home on Avenue D. Bill Van Orden, a clerk at the deli, was one of the last people to see Wanda alive.
Did you see anybody with her?
No. No, she came in by herself and she left by herself.
Witnesses reported seeing Wanda on her way home outside what was then school number 8 on Conkey Avenue. She was struggling with the grocery bags. They also said they saw a large brown car driving slowly down the street towards Wanda.
When the witnesses had looked back again, Wanda was gone, and so was the vehicle.
News 10 NBC interviewed Wanda's teacher at the time.
I don't think she was the kind of girl to get into the car with a stranger. I think she was much too bright for this.
Wanda was described as being street smart. It was probably somebody that she had some level of familiarity with.
Whoever it was committed a brutal crime. Wanda, who was just 4 feet tall and 65 pounds, had been raped, strangled, and dumped about 7.5 miles from where she was abducted.
We have evidence that supports a sexual assault occurred.
So semen sample?
Correct.
Pubic hair?
Yes.
State police shared these pictures with News 10 NBC. They have never been released to the public. This is what Wanda was wearing when she was abducted and killed.
The coat is a multicolored coat with a pattern on it. She was wearing a blue dress. It was blue and white checkered dress. And then she was also wearing green shorts.
You believe the killer put her clothes back on?
Yes, it's believed that she was redressed after the sexual assault.
The chopper was being used for aerial photography of the scene.
The state police helicopter was set up above the crime scene and Wanda's neighborhood where she disappeared. These are pictures taken that day. Dozens of troopers, along with Rochester and Webster police officers, worked the case.
Parents must have been just filled with fear.
Wanda's mother, Joyce Walkowitz, a widow, had to be taken to the hospital twice for emotional stress. People were already on edge after the murder of 10-year-old Carmen Cologne a year and a half earlier. The Rochester girl had also been abducted, raped, and strangled. Her body left in a ditch near Churchville.
And those cases have never been genetically linked. Now, this particular case, we do have DNA.
But investigators have never been able to find a match. That could change with advancements in technology.
And we're just one swab from figuring out who did this.
Do you think that the killer could still be here around Rochester?
Yes, it's possible. Once we get that match, we're off to the races.
You're done.
Yep.
If you have any information on the murder of Wanda Walkowitz, call New York State Police at the number on your screen, 398-4100. You can also email crimetip@troopers.ny.gov. Coming up next week, the case of Michelle Maenza, found dead just months later in Macedon. We'll show you evidence never released before. Nikki Rudd, News 10 NBC.
Nikki, thank you. And you can go to our website to see our other double initial murder reports. We also have an interactive map on the cases and a web extra that includes more clues in the Walkowitz case. Just go to WHEC.com and click on Inside the Evidence. The early 1970s were a scary time in Rochester. 3 young girls were kidnapped, raped, and murdered.
This month, News 10 NBC is taking you inside the evidence of the double initial murders. First, Carmen Cologne, found near Churchville. Then Wanda Walkowitz, dumped in Webster. Tonight, the case of Michelle Maenza, found in Macedon. The killer has never been caught. News 10 NBC's Nikki Rudd got her hands on evidence in the case never seen before.
It was Thanksgiving weekend, 1973, just 8 months after Wanda Walkowitz was found dead. This time, another girl with double initials was murdered in the same way.
The autopsy revealed that the girl was strangled. Death was caused by asphyxiation.
11-year-old Michelle Maenza had also been raped.
She lived here on Webster Crescent in the city of Rochester with her mother. She went to school number 33 on nearby Webster Avenue.
It was her first day to be allowed to walk home by herself.
Wayne County Sheriff's Detective Sergeant Kevin Kuhn says on November 26, 1973, Michelle's classmates spotted her after school. She was on Webster Avenue and Ackerman Street near the North Goodman Street shopping plaza.
Her mother had lost her purse there a couple days prior, and Michelle was planning on looking for her mom's purse.
But she wouldn't make it there.
Well, she's a very sensitive girl, and she likes to look for her friends.
News 10 NBC interviewed Michelle's father, Christopher Mayenza, after she disappeared. He said there was no indication of anything wrong.
No, nothing. Not a thing. But she wouldn't run away from home anyway.
Detectives later found a witness who saw Michelle sitting in the front seat of a car at the same intersection her classmates had seen her.
And the car was traveling at a high rate of speed, and Michelle appeared to be crying.
That was around 3:30 p.m. There would be 2 more sightings of Michelle that day. First, around 4:30 p.m., a girl who looked like Michelle was seen sitting in a car at Carol's Restaurant, a burger joint in Panorama Plaza in Penfield.
The suspect, a man with dirty hands, returned to the car carrying a bag and a cup.
Then at 5:30 p.m., another sighting, this time on Route 350 in Walworth.
He described the individual as holding the girl by the wrist, again, as well as the trunk being open.
The suspect and vehicle description were exactly the same.
Do you believe that was Michelle?
I believe so.
2 days later, Michelle was found dead less than a mile away. The Walworth volunteer fire chief at the time discovered her body in a ditch on Eddy Road in Macedon.
This is a view of where Michelle Mayenza's body was located on November 28th.
Wayne County Sheriff's investigators showed News 10 NBC pictures that have never been shared before. This was the coat Michelle was wearing when she went missing.
The coat was actually found 7/10 of a mile to the west on the same road, Eddy Road. These are the boots that Michelle was wearing. They were able to determine ligature, strangulation.
And
the autopsy revealed that there was a hamburger and onions in Michelle's stomach.
Detectives also recovered key evidence, semen from Michelle's body and her underwear.
Our chemist in our lab is going to check over the information that's been taken from the body.
There is some DNA present, just the technology at this point isn't enough to extract a profile.
Provided information.
But this time, police got a good description of the suspect from those 2 witnesses. Here's the composite released to the media.
I feel that there's no question that somebody knows this man. He was seen on two different occasions in the area where we're looking.
He was described as a white man between 25 to 35 years old, about 6 feet tall, 165 pounds. He was driving a beige or tan-colored car.
I see. Wellman.
A hotline was set up for tips in the case. Hundreds of calls came in, but no arrest was ever made. The big question for police.
Are you convinced that it was the same man who killed Carmen Colon and Wanda Wolkowitz?
I'm not convinced, but I strongly suspect that we're looking for the same person.
Nearly 50 years later, Detective Sergeant Kuntz agrees.
I definitely feel that there's a good chance that all 3 cases are connected.
Do you think this person is still out there?
I have the feeling that they are.
Anyone with information on the murder of Michelle Mayenza is asked to call or email the Wayne County Sheriff's Office. We have that information on the screen and online at WHEC.com. Coming up next week, the similarities and differences between these double initial murders. Were they all the work of one killer? You might be surprised what investigators told me. Nikki Rudd, News 10 NBC.
And you can go to our website to see the other double initial murder reports. We also have an interactive map that traces the last steps of each girl. Just go to WHEC.com and click on Inside the Evidence.
This month, News 10 NBC has been taking you inside the evidence of the double initial murders. The brutal murders of 3 Rochester girls in the early 1970s have never been solved. Their bodies were dumped in or near a town that started with the same initial as their first and last names. Carmen Colon was found near Churchville, Wanda Wolkowitz in Webster, and Michelle Mayenza was found in Macedon. New tonight, was it the work of one killer? You might be surprised what investigators told News 10 NBC's Nikki Rudd.
There are a lot of similarities in these cases. Each victim was around the same age, 10 or 11 years old. They were all abducted from Rochester, sexually assaulted and strangled.
There are many different theories, one or two killers. Well, first of all, I don't know the answer.
Every investigator I spoke with agrees it could have been one killer.
Are they connected?
I believe they are. I think there's too many similarities.
Carmen Colon, Wanda Walkowitz, and Michelle Mayenza all came from low-income families. They were all Catholic, and none of them lived in a home with both parents.
Have you more firmly developed the conviction that this was the same man in all three killings?
I would say yes. I mean, because all the similarities are there.
That was the RPD captain working the case back in 1973. Investigators today also note many similarities.
They all occurred between about 3:30 in the afternoon and 5:30 in the afternoon.
All the girls were dumped in rural areas on the side of a road in a town matching the initials of their first and last names.
There was definitely some similarities between those cases, yes.
But State Police investigator George Jerbick believes the whole double initial thing may have been a coincidence.
My name is also matching initials, first name and last name. I think it's more common than people realize.
He also points out that none of the cases have been genetically linked.
At least two of the cases, the Michelle Mayenza case and the Wanda Walkowitz case, to me, look more similar. I'm not saying I'm discounting it. I would just say I'd be cautious to link those cases.
Here's why some investigators, including an FBI profiler, believe a separate suspect is responsible for the murder of Carmen Colon.
Carmen, when she was found partially clothed. Wanda and Michelle were found fully clothed.
Monroe County Sheriff Sergeant C.J. Zimmerman says Carmen was also found with an empty stomach. Not the case for Wanda and Michelle. And Carmen was manually strangled from the front. Wanda and Michelle were strangled by ligature from behind.
I think there are circumstances that explain the differences.
Those circumstances? Carmen was actually able to get away and was seen the day she disappeared running down 490 half naked.
Kind of makes sense that she would be half clothed, that the strangulation was a lot more personal and from the front.
So what about suspects?
Representing himself in his murder trial,
Joseph Nasso is a convicted serial killer on death row. He lived in Rochester at the time of the double initial murders. A woman he killed in California had the same name as one of the victims in the double initial murders, Carmen Colon.
I can't find the words to express the sorrow I feel for what I've done.
Kenneth Bianchi also grew up in Rochester. He's known as the Hillside Strangler for a string of murders in California, but
those suspects have been ruled out by DNA evidence.
Another person of interest was Carmen's uncle, Miguel Colon.
He committed suicide in 1991. For decades,
I see. Well,
people have called in tips on who the double initial murderer could be.
all right.
Hundreds of phone calls, a lot of people, a lot of theories, which we've already heard many, many times.
After our exclusive series, more tips are coming in.
I think there's a strong possibility that they're still out there, but I guess we won't know that until, eventually the DNA comes back to somebody.
The Wanda Walkowitz case is the only one that has viable DNA. Right now, the State Police Lab is working to develop protocols to use open source genealogy databases to find a match that could lead to the killer. Investigators believe it's that DNA that will finally solve this case. Nikki Rudd, News 10 NBC.